Welcome back to the Multifamily AI Playbook podcast. Today, it's just me. I want to talk a little bit about one of the simplest, most practical ways for a property management company to start using AI without taking on a tremendous, giant transformation project. A lot of people hear AI in operations and they immediately picture some huge, complicated rollout. They imagine replacing systems, retraining teams, changing every workflow, and taking a big leap of faith. That's usually where the conversation goes sideways in my experience. Because the truth is, most operators are not looking for a science project. They're looking for fewer headaches, better consistency, better resident experience, and a way to solve real operational problems without adding a bunch of new labor. And that's why after hours emergency response is such an interesting place to start. And this is AI first emergency response, in contrast to the other things that are out there on the market right now. And in this case, it's narrow, it's painful because after hours is expensive. Having technicians incurring after hours overtime costs or missing an emergency, like all of that is really painful. So it's a great place to solve problems, and it's expensive, therefore, when it goes wrong. It has a very clear operational payoff when it goes right. So today I want to walk through why an AI-powered after-hours emergency intake service can be a very smart starting point for operators, and why it compares favorably to what's out there now, which is like these traditional human call center models, and why the economics are compelling at somewhere between $50 and $1 per unit per month, depending on what you're doing, and why this may be one of the cheapest on-ramps into practical AI adoption in property management. This is not about replacing people. This is about replacing inconsistency. And so I think it's a great place to start the discussion. One of the most revealing moments in property management is what happens when a resident has a real problem after hours. That is the report card for the property. It is the service experience for those residents. It could be water coming through the ceiling. It could be no heat. It could be a sewer backup. It could be a broken pipe, a lockout, no AC in extreme weather, something that the resident believes is urgent and stressful. And at that moment, your brand is not being represented by your mission statement. It is being represented by whoever or whatever answers that phone call. And historically, that has been a pretty mixed bag. Sometimes it's a voicemail. Sometimes it's a phone tree. Sometimes it's an overworked on-call technician. Sometimes it's a human answering service that takes a message, but doesn't really understand the property, the emergency rules, or even the urgency of whatever matter it is. And sometimes you've got a resident who's repeating the same story 3 different times before the issue gets anywhere useful. So when people talk about the resident experience, they often focus on leasing and amenities, or what communication is like during business hours. But one of the strongest trust moments, where trust is won or lost, is what happens when something goes wrong at night. This is where consistency matters. This is where speed matters. This is where operational sloppiness becomes very visible. The first few moments after an emergency call matter more than most people realize. If the issue is captured poorly, routed late, slowly, if it's escalated inconsistently, or it's not documented clearly, the rest of the process starts from a bad position. And when that happens, everyone feels it. The resident feels ignored. The site team gets woken up in the middle of the night, or they come in the next morning to a mess. The technicians, right? They get interrupted without context. The manager gets blamed for something that started with a weak first touch. So the question is not whether or not after hours coverage matters. Of course it matters. The real question is whether or not the old model is actually the best model. So in this case, what we're talking about is not some giant AI platform that's trying to run the whole maintenance department on day one. Spoiler alert, that is Vendoroo's superpower. Okay, we can run all of your maintenance, triage, and coordination. But this is much narrower than that. This is an after hours AI emergency service that starts with answering your incoming calls or text messages or whatever may come through the portal, and talking to that or interacting with that resident and capturing the issue in a thorough, structured way. It will ask additional questions. Is it a small leak, or is water gushing right from the pipe? And maybe we'll ask to take photos, capture those photos. And once it understands the issue, we'll apply the properties rules for what counts as an emergency and then routes those urgent issues to the correct on-call person and logs all of this process, the transcriptions of the phone calls, the text messages, all of that gets logged into the PMS. So you have a real record of what happened. And most importantly, throughout this whole process, Vendoroo has a human in the loop capability that makes sure that if anything goes wrong during that whole process that I just mentioned, you have a trained expert in maintenance ready on the standby to step in and solve that problem. So if you have an edge case, you have something that's unusual, or the AI tries to warm transfer the phone call and the technician who's supposed to pick up is like, he's sleepy, is like, hello, and then he hangs up immediately. Like, that's not a warm handoff. And the AI is like, hey, I tried. And the human in the loop will step in and make sure that that moment doesn't become a point of failure, that it becomes a moment of success. And so again, what we promise is end-to-end coverage, not because the AI is that good, but because we have the most capable and thorough and seamless human in the loop integration into the process, right? So, and this matters because there is a lot of I think a lot of AI discussions get inflated where people start promising total automation by AI, full maintenance coordination through AI, but end-to-end decision-making can only happen, and this is really important to understand, can only happen in the presence of a human in the loop who can handle the edge cases, or when the AI, makes a mistake, right? We have another AI called the judge that's watching everything our main AI does. And if there's anything that doesn't look right, the humans in the loop get a notice and they can step in if necessary. And even when the judge raises its hand, our humans in the loop only get involved about 2% of the time. So it's not often, but if it breaks just one time, that's too many. So human in the loop is critical here in this discussion. And the other thing about this product is it's not trying to do everything. It is trying to do one important thing very well: create reliable, immediate, thorough first response after hours. And by the way, this is important too, to save your technicians from the burden of having to do all this themselves, from the burden of having to carry that emergency phone and not have a weekend to themselves, or be interrupted with emergency calls that aren't really emergencies after all. Let us step in front of that. Let the AI step in front of that and be very patient with residents who are upset at 2 a.m. and complaining about something that's not really an emergency, but is really, really important to them. We will triage those, and your technicians don't have to be on the front lines of those kinds of discussions. That's why this is such a good beachhead. It's focused enough for those that are new to AI to understand. It's measurable enough to evaluate, and it's limited enough that you don't feel like you're taking a reckless bet on AI. And in property management, we know that we're not always the first, fastest movers in technology. And for us, trust is won not by sounding futuristic, but it's won by being useful and actually solving problems and making people's lives better at the end of the day. And this is not AI that's boiling the ocean. This is AI handling the first mile of after hours coordination. So now let's talk about how the comparison that people will naturally make, which is AI to kind of human call centers or answering services. And to be fair, human call centers exist for a reason. They solve a real problem. They create coverage. They make sure somebody picks up. They can take messages and they can relay them. And in some cases, they do reduce the burden on the internal staff. But they come with some built-in limitations. First, humans vary. One rep may be excellent. Another may be paying half attention. One had a bad day. One may ask the right questions. Another may not. One may understand the emergencies, the emergency rules, what constitute emergency. Another might be new and not understand it yet. Another might treat everything as urgent just to be safe, or worse, miss something that really should have been escalated. So that inconsistency is risky for you and can be expensive. And when it goes wrong, it damages your reputation. Second, most answering services are still fundamentally message-taking systems. They may answer the phone, but they do not necessarily go through the process I was talking about to create a thoroughly vetted, well-structured, property-aware work order. So instead of solving any of the problems, they just move the problem to the next person. Or if maybe not solving the problem, but making sure the problem is really, really clear so that whoever's getting dispatched can be really, really efficient. Instead of doing that, you can get something that's just sloppy, and that's unacceptable. Third is, of course, AI scales infinitely. Human labor, if you add properties in the portfolio and you need to expand your call center, you've got new people, you have to train them, you have turnover, AI doesn't have turnover. So with humans, as you add people into the pool, variability grows, supervision grows. AI changes that equation. An AI first after hours emergency intake service can handle every call with the same logic, the same required fields, the same decision path every time, the same routing standards every time. It does not get tired at 1:30 in the morning. It does not forget to ask the unit number if they've got permission to enter. It does not get creative with the emergency definition. It does not skip documentation because the call queue is stacked up and they need to hurry on and get on to the next call. They're not managing 4 different calls at once or 4 different text messages at once, which is happening. Maybe you don't realize it, but that's what's happening. And their attention is distracted. The better framing might be this: humans are valuable and will remain valuable where judgment, exception handling, empathy, sometimes, although AI is getting really good at empathy, or edge cases matter most. That's when humans matter most. AI is valuable where speed, consistency, structure, and repeatability matter most. And speed and consistency matter in handling emergencies. And if an emergency comes up that is an edge case, well, we have the human in the loop to address that. So you're covered. Now, I want to talk about the economics of this a little bit because this is where this conversation becomes very real. Everything that I've said probably sounds great, but what is the cost? And our system runs between 50 cents and $1, okay, per unit per month, depending on some factors and the time that you have the system in place and the extent to which you want us to continue to triage work orders. Won't need to get into all of that, but let's just use an average. Let's say it's 75 cents, right? 75 cents per unit per month. This kind of service is not priced like a moonshot innovation budget item. It's priced like a very manageable operating decision. Take a 300 unit property. That's about $225 a month. At 500 units, you're talking about roughly $375 a month. And you are no longer asking a property management company to approve some giant transformation spend. You're asking them whether they want a fixed cost, always on, after hours response layer that will reduce chaos, reduce missed emergencies, reduce false alarms, and improve the resident experience. And compared to the alternatives, that pricing is pretty attractive. It definitely compares price-wise favorably to patching together your after-hours costs, overtime, the burden on your technicians to carry that emergency phone and not be able to take a weekend. And it definitely compares favorably to human powered cost centers for sure. But there are a few things that you want to consider that is not just the cost of the product, but cost includes bad dispatches, right? People that go out, technicians that get dispatched for things that aren't emergencies. Cost includes missed urgency. Cost includes unnecessary interruptions. Cost includes resident frustration. Cost includes the next morning cleanup when documentation is incomplete or routing was handled poorly, and now you've got angry residents or a problem that wasn't solved. This is where operators sometimes undercount the cost of the old system. If you miss emergency and a water leak goes on for an hour or two longer than it otherwise would have, you might be talking about the difference between a $1,000 cleanup and $1 million cleanup, literally. So the value here is not just the monthly number. It's that, the service is aimed at one of those messy, labor-heavy, error-prone areas where even a modest improvement can pay quickly for itself. So this is one of those cases where I think the headline price is only part of the story. The avoided friction matters too. The avoided escalations, the avoided problems that got 1,000 times more expensive, those matter here. Now, if I had to pick 3 words that matter most to you, they would be reliability, thoroughness, and consistency. So reliability means the call gets answered. Thoroughness means the relevant details are captured. And consistency means the same logic gets applied every time. These sound simple, but in after-hours operations, they're not always simple in practice. A resident does not judge your company by how pretty your advertising is or, how elegantly you managing your org chart with offshore staff. They judge you based on whether or not their urgent problem was handled, like somebody knew what they were doing. And what residents really want in those moments is not perfection, but they want confidence. They want to know somebody answered, that somebody understood, that somebody captured the situation, and that somebody started the next step, that they were heard, they were not ignored, and they were followed up with as things progressed. There's also a team benefit. Your technicians and your managers are not being forced to serve as amateur call center infrastructure after hours. They're not playing therapist to a resident at 1:30 in the morning. They are getting cleaner information, better work orders, more well-defined. They're getting more appropriate escalation, like emergencies are emergencies. Everything else is not being escalated. And they're getting fewer unnecessary disruptions. So they're happy. Their quality of life is better. And for larger operators, consistency across the portfolio becomes a real strategic advantage. The more communities you operate, the harder it is to tolerate each site having a different standard for what happens when the phone rings at night. So, consistency may not be glamorous, but in property management and operations, it wins. It is what creates your brand. So if you step back, the appeal of an AI after-hours emergency service is actually pretty straightforward. It solves a real problem. It's easy to understand. It's easy to pay for. It's inexpensive. It improves consistency. It reduces friction. It supports the resident experience. It gives operators a sensible, low-drama starting point for AI adoption. And it improves the quality of life of your staff. That's why I think this category is so compelling. Not because it tries to do everything, but because it does one important thing really well. Every urgent call gets answered. Every issue gets captured more thoroughly. Every escalation follows a more consistent path. And every operator gets a chance to improve one of the messiest parts of the maintenance experience without signing up for a massive operational overhaul or a huge after hours burden or, a pseudo call center that's really not filled with people that understand the problem, but that people with just warm bodies who can take the call. And so I think for a lot of property management companies, this is the first step. So thanks for listening. I hope I shared some good tidbits with you today. If you're interested in learning more about the after-hours service here at Vendoroo, we are here at www.vendoroo.ai. And you can drop us a line at sales@vendoroo.ai. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next show, until our next episode, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate your time.